don't you dare come to the ceremony event. It'll be a laughingstock if a drab oldie shows up. It's my big day after all. You better not come. I felt dizzy at Callista's words of being everyone's laughingstock. It seems Callista doesn't consider me family. To her, I'm just an embarrassment. Hey, oldie, where are you now? The moment I pressed the call button, I was greeted by Callista's grating voice. She spoke rapidly, her voice laced with panic. It sounded like she was in a state of frenzy. Leaving such a ridiculous note. You think you'll get away with it? Where are you? Come back home, right now. I could hear Brooke's voice, too. Both of them sounded desperate. My name is Ethelyn. I'm a 39-year-old housewife. I've been juggling part-time clerical work at a local real estate agency, with raising my daughter Callista and household chores for over a decade. I married Brooks 12 years ago. He had Callista, a child from his previous marriage. I met Brooks at my former workplace. Back then, I worked for a construction company, and Brooks used to come there for business. Our company was strict with clients, but Brooks always managed to charm me with his smile. I once recommended Brooks' products to the company. I wanted to be of help to him. As a result, his company got selected for a project. That led to us going out for meals, and eventually he proposed. I joyfully accepted, quitting my job to prepare for our wedding. Shortly before the wedding, Brooks revealed he was living with his 6-year-old daughter. I thought it was a lie at first. It was hard to believe, but it was true. I met Callista a week before the wedding. She was shy or something, hiding behind Brooks and not coming out to meet me. That's when I decided to live together for Callista, to turn her into a fine adult. Let's take care of Callista properly until she graduates from high school. I'm not sure why, but Callista's anxious eyes peeking from behind Brooks haunted me. Resolved, I chose to marry Brooks. It was my first marriage, and my family was strongly against it. Dad was furious, calling it nonsensical and ridiculous, but I went against my parents' wishes and married. Had I listened to them, I might have avoided the hell that was to come. 12 years into this marriage, Callista is now 18, on the verge of graduating high school. It should be a moment of joy, but I couldn't feel happy. The thought of making her a fine adult, as I had resolved when deciding to marry Brooks, came back to me. Hey, oldie, where's my knit shirt? You didn't steal it, did you? A couple of years after we started living together, Callista began calling me oldie. At first, she was kind. She gradually got used to me, but then she started calling me oldie, and her attitude became rougher. Is this a knit shirt you're talking about? I pulled it out from the laundry I was folding and handed it to Callista. Why did you wash it? What if it shrinks? It's supposed to be dry cleaned, you know? You really don't get it, do you? So clumsy. I had hand-washed and air-dried the knit shirt, thinking the cleaning process would damage its fabric. But I couldn't explain this to Callista, and could only respond with, I'm sorry. Callista snatched it from my hands as if she was grabbing it and said, You're really useless, before leaving. Her words were like thorns piercing my heart. I couldn't argue back, only apologize. I didn't understand why Callista had become so rough with me. Initially, I thought she was mocked for her father's remarriage, but apparently that wasn't it. Around that time, Brooks' attitude towards me started to change. He used to smile like he did when he was selling, but lately, he stopped smiling at home, and often seemed in a bad mood. And he began to call me, hey, or you. Callista's attitude towards me changed along with his. I thought maybe I wasn't doing enough, so I made sure not to slack off with household chores, and to keep a close eye on Callista. I wanted her to grow up to be a fine adult. But contrary to my wishes, Callista's behavior towards me got worse day by day. Calling me oldie had become the norm. I never heard a thank you from Callista anymore. Strangely, during parent-teacher meetings in elementary school, they said Callista was normal in class, showing no signs of a rough attitude. Brooks talked to Callista normally, and even smiled at times, meaning it was only towards me that she was so terrible. This hurt me even more. I couldn't talk to Brooks about it, as he had grown cold towards me, a far cry from his old self. I had no one to consult. I continued my life with a heavy and dark weight on my heart. I became isolated within my home. My isolation at home worsened. Since middle school, Callista stopped telling me about school, with Brooks attending events instead. I had to hear about the dates for sports days or art festivals from neighbors. It seemed like Brooks and Callista were getting along well, sometimes going out together. I wanted to be treated as part of the family by Brooks and Callista. I had hoped we would live happily together. I never knew not having that wish come true could be so painful. And Brooks' attitude towards me kept getting worse. "There's dust on the stairs. Clean it up. Aren't you the housewife? The toilet paper is running out. Are you even cleaning the bathroom? And you're really clumsy." I often received such remarks from Brooks. Originally, when we first married, we shared household chores. Brooks had been doing housework living with Callista. In the beginning, he was happy we could share the chores. Now, I do all the housework. "It's not right for the housewife to do all the chores." Brooks used to say that. Callista was an easy child to take care of, but that only made me feel more hindered and depressed. Whenever I tried to talk to Brooks, "You're not trying hard enough," was his dismissive response. In the end, it was all my fault. The more I tried to talk to Brooks, the more a heavy air weighed on my heart. And he would nitpick and persistently attack me over any mishap in household chores. "Can't even clean properly. No growth after all these years? Do you lack learning ability?" Brooks looked down at me with disdain. All I could do was apologize. "I'm sorry. I'll try my hardest. Please forgive me." Brooks would sigh exaggeratedly, as if fed up. "Even if you try your hardest, you can't do it. That's why you're being scolded. Always saying you'll do it, but have you ever actually done it?" Brooks' words whittled away at my heart. As time passed with my heart worn down, Callista turned 18. I was curious about Callista's plans for the future, but she wouldn't tell me, nor would Brooks. By this time, I had stopped speaking to Brooks and Callista unless absolutely necessary. I accidentally overheard Callista and Brooks talking about her post-graduation plans. It was eavesdropping, but I wanted to know, so I stopped and listened until the end. "I got it sorted. I can go to university on recommendation, and even got a scholarship, thanks to you, Dad. Thank you." I could hear Callista's happy voice. She would never speak to me like that. "Good for you. It's the result of your efforts. It was worth pushing all that clumsy housekeeping onto that inept maid." Could they be talking about me as the maid? "Yeah, it was a good way to vent my stress." I could hear their scornful laughter. I left the spot and locked myself in the bathroom, the only place I can be alone. I crouched in the toilet, holding my head and crying. To think that Brooks and Callista thought of me in such a way. I had endured these past 10 years. No matter how close to breaking my heart was, I continued as Callista's mother and Brooks' wife. Even when my heart screamed that it was at its limit, I pushed through, trying my best. There were times when I thought I couldn't get up, but I forced myself to, preparing lunches, making breakfast, doing laundry and cleaning. Honestly, I just wanted to lie down because it hurt. But if I did, I was sure I would become unnecessary to Brooks and Callista. That fear kept driving me. I spent my days exhausted. Honestly, I don't remember much from that time. One day, when I was out shopping, a neighbor told me something shocking. Tomorrow was Callista's high school ceremony event. I couldn't say I didn't know and just vaguely smiled before leaving. As soon as I got home, I collapsed on the sofa. I had always thought about making Callista a respectable adult. Her high school graduation was supposed to be a milestone. Yet again, I was left out. In this house, I'm forbidden from having a smartphone or using a PC. The only thing I have is a simple mobile phone that can make calls. Since Brooke handles all the school-related matters, I don't even have anyone I can call a friend. I had no way to get information about the school. Still, I learned the dates of sports days and recitals from neighbors' talks or children's conversations after school, and secretly attended them. I wanted to properly attend the high school ceremony event to celebrate Callista's step into adulthood. While I was crying on the sofa, Callista came home from school. "Oldie, why are you lounging around like that? It's so gloomy. You're making the whole house dark. Can't you do something about it?" Callista glared at me, even though it was her fault. If Callista had told me about the date of the ceremony event, I wouldn't have felt this way. For the first time, I felt anger, rising slowly from the depths of my heart. "So, the ceremony event is tomorrow, right? It seems you didn't tell me, I asked Callista with an accusing tone. Callista looked a bit startled by my defiant words, but then sighed dramatically, as if to cover up. So what? You're not going to the ceremony event anyway, so why do you need to know the date? I retorted to Callista's words. Huh? And tilted my head. I never said I wouldn't go to the ceremony event. Don't come. If a drab oldie like you shows up, you'll be the laughingstock. It's my big moment after all. Don't you dare come. I felt dizzy at Callista's words about being everyone's laughingstock. Callista really doesn't think of me as family. I'm just an embarrassment to her. I had hoped for forgiveness this time, but it wasn't granted. The words "don't come" from Callista stabbed me in the heart. I was clearly just a nuisance, as Callista herself made clear. That night, Brooks came home with a suit and a dry cleaning bag. He had taken the suit to the cleaners himself without asking me. Brooks obviously knew about Callista's ceremony event. Seeing me look at the suit, Brooks said, "That's right, you didn't hear it from Callista." He looked at me with pity, laughing mockingly. Indeed, I'm the least needed in this house. Thinking of them as family was just my wishful thinking. My heart had already surpassed its limit a long time ago, I realized then. So, I decided to end being a part of this family. The next day, Brooks and Callista left for the high school ceremony event together. I was left behind as usual. And, "We'll eat out tonight, so don't bother with dinner," Brooks told me. I wasn't invited. The old me would have cried and given up, even with such treatment. But those days are over now. I had decided to leave this house. I had made up my mind last night. As soon as the two left the house, I quickly packed my bags, left a note, and walked out. I couldn't be a part of Callista and Brooks's family anymore. I decided to go to my parents' house, about an hour away by bus. At my parents' house, I would start the process of cutting ties with Brooks and Callista. In the note I left at home, I wrote about severing family ties, wanting to live alone, and requesting to discuss details through a lawyer. As of last night, I hadn't found a lawyer, but I was sure Dad would introduce me to one. My family has been owned by wealthy landowners for generations. Dad owns quite a bit of real estate and is known as a distinguished person in the area. He surely had contacts with lawyers in his network. I remember meeting a lawyer when I was at my parents' home. Apart from consulting a lawyer, another task was to sell the house where Brooks and Callista still live. The house was built on land owned by Dad, and he had paid for its construction as my wedding gift. I had been slowly repaying Dad from the money I earned from my part-time job in real estate. This part-time job was also through Dad's connection. Dad is the owner of both the building and the land. It's registered in his name. At that time, Brooks probably thought the house was a gift and never asked about the ownership. Maybe he was afraid of offending Dad and losing the house. Brooks is only brave in front of those he sees as beneath him. He's aggressive towards inferiors, but fawns over superiors. I recounted everything that had happened. As I spoke, tears flowed uncontrollably. My sobbing was incessant, and I had to pause my story many times. But Dad listened till the end. Tears welled up in his eyes, too. What made me happy was that Dad didn't blame me for my decisions back then. In the end, "You've had it hard," he said. Then Dad made several phone calls, and soon lawyers and real estate management people came to the house. Everything happened quickly after that. It was decided that the house would be demolished. The demolition was set for a week later. In the note I left, "Please leave within a week," I wrote. Dad sarcastically remarked, "That's quite generous of you." But I didn't just want to deal with complaints later. The week passed as I consulted the lawyer about the divorce. I told Mom about the divorce too, and we cried together. I'll never forget the moment Mom's face turned devilish for a second. Dad and I also talked about the future. I had to establish a new life foundation. It took courage and was painful to talk to my parents, but once I did, my heart felt lighter, and for the first time in 10 years, I slept soundly. After a relatively peaceful week at my parents' home, my mobile phone rang. As expected, it was Callista. Honestly, I didn't want to talk anymore. The memory of Callista's past treatment came back, leaving a dark stain on my heart. I decided to ignore it. But the calls didn't stop, and Brooks also called repeatedly. They must have been calling about the note I left. Maybe they were contacted by the demolition company. And for 10 years, Callista had always called me Oldie or you. She had been exploiting me. The way I was treated for so long was nothing like how a family should behave. The thought of dealing with Brooks and Callista again sent shivers down my spine. However, I can't just leave things as they are. I need to settle the past properly to move forward. Also, simply running away and leaving things unresolved won't satisfy me. After the terrible treatment I've received, I owe Brooks and Callista a fitting response. With resolve, I answered the phone. Hey, Oldie, where are you now? As soon as I pressed the call button, I heard Callista's annoying voice. She spoke rapidly, her voice dripping with panic. She seemed to be in a state of a frenzy. Leaving such a ridiculous note and thinking you'll get away with it? Where are you? Come back home right now. I could hear Brooks' voice too. Both of them were panicking. I imagined Callista returning from the ceremony event. Coming back from the event to find the oldie, her stress-relieving servant substitute, gone. And a note saying she should get divorced and leave the house. Even Callista would panic in such a situation. Especially on the day of an important ceremony event. I couldn't help but smile at Callista's desperation. Who is this? Callista was taken aback by my unexpected response. I hung up the phone. Then, I called the real estate management company to confirm when the demolition would start. As scheduled, it was to start tomorrow, and Brooks had been informed. I requested to postpone the demolition to the day after tomorrow and asked them to inform Brooks of the delay. 1 day of reprieve was given. Brooks would likely come here. That's when I would unleash my retribution on Brooks and Callista. Brooks and Callista called dozens of times, but I ignored them all. The next day, around noon, I heard the doorbell ring. Ding dong! I could hear pounding on the front door. It must be Brooks and Callista. They probably wanted to come earlier, but the bus connections are terrible, and could take an incredibly long time. Brooks and Callista were panting. They must have been in a rush. I'd arranged with Dad and Mom to stay back, so it seemed like I was the only one home. I led Brooks and Callista into the living room. Brooks entered the house, visibly shaken. He's intimidated by my dad. Dad is a wealthy and distinguished person in town, plus he has an imposing presence. Brooks probably sees him as superior. Callista, on the other hand, isn't intimidated at all. She seems fully intent on overpowering me and taking me back. She sat down in the living room chair, legs crossed. With arms folded, she silently gestured for me to sit across from her. I prepared tea with leisurely movements, taking my time before sitting opposite her. Impatient, Callista addressed me. What the hell is this about? Brooks, sitting next to me, placed the note I had left on the table. I didn't react at all, just silently stared into Callista's eyes. Callista looked away first, trying to shake off the awkwardness with a laugh. What was that "who is this" yesterday? Such a poor act. Still, I remained silent, continuing to stare at Callista. Callista became uncomfortable under my gaze, readjusting her seat and continuing to speak. Sorry, but you're just a clumsy oldie. You can't live without relying on us. You're like trash. I almost reacted to Callista's harsh words, but held back, because I noticed a tremble in Callista's voice. She must be putting on a brave front. Brooks had been silent this whole time, just observing how things would unfold. Stop being stubborn and come back home. Callista was trying to confuse and berate me into returning home. The more agitated Callista got, the calmer I responded. I don't have a family, do I? Oh, I have parents. But you two aren't my family, are you? Callista, too, must be feeling out of her depth. She raised her voice. What are you talking about? Dad and I are your family, right, Dad? Callista seemed to feel disadvantaged on her own and started seeking Brooks' support. Brooks looked around, ensuring no one else was present, and then, as if reassured, spoke to me. That's right. You can't live without us, so you're coming back. Brooks began to act arrogantly, noticing that my parents were not around. Looking back, what a weak man he is. Therefore, I have no family. I responded firmly. No matter what Brooks and Callista say, I will continue to treat them as strangers. Brooks and Callista are not my family. If they were, they wouldn't have treated me like a slave. A family is supposed to support and help each other, to be there for one another in times of need. But Brooks and Callista were different. They had treated me like a servant, an event for their stress for 10 long years. Brooks and Callista believed that it's normal. They don't realize how terrible and wrong it is. They have been oppressing me unconsciously. I'm amazed I endured it for 10 years. I'm impressed with myself. It all started when I saw Callista's anxious eyes peeking out from behind. Bound by my own words to raise Callista into a respectable adult. For those words, I devoted myself desperately to Brooks and Callista. So I endured until Callista's high school graduation. I had hoped that Brooks and Callista would change their attitude towards me by the time of her graduation, and that we could continue as a family. Naturally, they betrayed my expectations, leading to this situation. Everything was decided by their attitude the day before the ceremony event. That's why I'm treating them appropriately now. Brooks and Callista are no longer my family. That's why I won't treat them as such. Realizing the meaning behind my treating them as strangers, Callista changed her approach. Mom, Dad and I are your family, aren't we? Stop this pointless act, please. Somewhere along the line, I went from being oldie to mom in Callista's speech. Apparently, Callista is starting to realize things won't go as before. Brooks, too, is nervously watching Callista and me. You might not be my birth mother, but we've lived together for so long, so please listen to my request. Callista unraveled her crossed arms, clasping her hands together in front of her. Her previously defiant posture has reversed. I have no recollection of asking for requests from someone who isn't family. I continued to respond coldly, suppressing my emotions. Tears started to well up in Callista's eyes. She pleaded with me in desperation. Please listen, that note you left is a lie, right? You can't really be selling the house. It can't be serious. After all, you're our family, Mom. Callista's use of Mom made me feel nauseous. Moreover, what Callista cared about was the house. She's probably anxious about losing the house. Even though losing the house is a fact. Is she only concerned about that? I wondered. In the end, it seems I'm unnecessary as long as they have a place to live. No matter how much Callista begs, my mind won't change. Callista lowered her face. She seems to be crying. What kind of joke is this? Enough with your disdainful attitude, Brooks said, probably unsettled by Callista's tears, and then directed aggressive words at me. What's with that note? Come back right now and stop the demolition. Brooks spoke rapidly, driven by anger. I can't do that. It's already been decided. I continued to answer with a suppressed emotional voice. You think you can get away with doing this to your family? That's why I keep saying you two aren't my family. Neither Brooks nor Callista seem to be listening. Please understand. I've already told you, you're not my family. How many times have I had to repeat the same words? Brooks suddenly stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Don't mess with me. I was startled, but managed to suppress my reaction. Who's messing around? How can I act like family now, after 10 years of not being treated as one? My voice came out harsher than I intended. I'm angry. I'm not showing it, but anger is bubbling up inside me like magma ready to erupt. Brooks and Callista's selfish actions are unforgivable. They trampled over my 10 years of hellish suffering and my efforts to overcome it. I tried to be a family with Brooks and Callista, but they rejected it, mocking and using me. They will never understand how lonely and painful it was to be excluded. I longed to be treated as family, but my wishes were never fulfilled. It took me 10 years to give up. I continued to try to build a relationship as a family, as Callista's mom, but this is the result. A self-mocking smile appeared on my face. Brooks and Callista looked at me with surprise, seeing my dry smile. Brooks seemed to lose his strength and slumped into the chair. These two, far from understanding my feelings, were trying to use me until the very end. No matter how much I cared for Brooks and Callista, they never thought of me. Even though I cherished them, they never cherished me. Then, when they find themselves in a tight spot, they suddenly claim we're family and try to use me. It's far too convenient. I feel not just a headache, but even nausea. Why did I endure this for 10 years for such people? Looking back, it's astonishing. But dwelling on it now is pointless. There's no future for me, Brooks and Callista together anymore. All I can do is make Brooks and Callista recognize their wrongdoing and pay for it. I no longer have any expectations or trust in Callista and Brooks. Brooks stood up and apologized deeply. I'm sorry, so please come back. I'm begging you. Even with his apology and plea for me to return, it doesn't touch my heart at all. I have no intention of extending a helping hand or living with them again. Enough already. I'm no longer your family. I'm a stranger to you. Callista, following Brooks's lead, started to apologize deeply too. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. We're family, so I want to go back together. I'm just appalled by this selfish way of speaking. After treating me like a stranger for 10 years, now you say come back because we're family? Do you really think I'd say okay? That's just too naive. That's not happening. I'm losing my ability to remain calm. Words I would never have said before start to spill out unrestrained. Harsh words that I'd refrained from saying to Brooks and Callista are now flowing freely. I don't want to hear any excuses. I can't trust any words you say. I can never see us as family again. Then I placed a sheet of paper in front of Brooks. It's a divorce petition. Of course, I had already signed it. Write the divorce petition now. I'll submit it. Write it here and now. Brooks is shaking his head. Then he showed me a smile. Think it over, will you? I'm just astounded by Brooks's persistence. Such a small-minded man. That flattering smile he's showing me, I had always misunderstood it. The smile he showed when we first met was a sleazy expression used to size someone up. I had mistaken it for kindness. Even thinking about it now makes me angry. I stood up and called Dad and Mom from the back. Dad and Mom appeared in the living room. Brooks' mouth hung open so wide it looked like his jaw might drop off. Tyrone. Dad glared sharply at Brooks. Mom also looked stern. Brooks, just from being glared at, shrank and hunched his shoulders. I apologize. Brooks apologized deeply, while Callista also apologized. I'm sorry for the trouble caused by Ethelyn's misdeeds to you and Aubrey. I thought I heard wrong. My misdeeds? What is he talking about? Is Brooks still trying to evade responsibility even now? I see Dad's eyebrows twitch slightly. However, Dad remains silent. Ethelyn left home on her own. We're just trying to persuade her to come back, right, Callista? Brooks prompts Callista to agree with his fabricated story. Ethelyn's misdeeds? Don't joke. Dad's loud voice echoes through the house, making the windows rattle. Brooks and Callista gasp and hold their breath. Dad stands in front of Brooks, bending down to meet his gaze. How can you interpret Ethelyn's actions as selfish? You only think of yourself. You're such a small man. Then Dad turns to Callista. You two have done terrible things following this man. What did you think of Ethelyn, fool? Again, Dad's loud voice resounds. Callista seems terrified, her body shaking. Dad stands up and glares at the two. Callista, you've been causing trouble at school, too. I've looked into it. Indeed, Dad had a detective friend investigate Callista, who had been forcibly taking money from a female student at school. The victim was too scared to consult anyone, but Dad was preparing to help with a criminal complaint. Callista treated me the same way she did at school. Callista exclaims, Lies, and widens her eyes. Did she snitch on me? I feel like I'm seeing Callista's true nature. Absolutely no remorse. She's only thinking about getting through this situation. And you, Brooks, you've been embezzling company money. This was also uncovered by the detective. Brooks had been making up business trips. I hired a detective to strengthen my case for divorce, but shockingly, incriminating facts about both emerged. Why would you even? Was it her? Brooks reacts just like Callista. No remorse. Too stubborn. They won't just face punishment from me. They need to face social consequences too. Mom speaks up. Well, that's enough. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house as soon as possible. Brooks, while crying, mutters, No, I don't want to. But he seems to give up after Dad hands him the pen. He sits down and signs the divorce papers. I glance at the clock. It's almost 7 p.m. The last bus home is at 7:30 p.m. Missing it means no other buses until tomorrow morning. It's a small town, no taxis available. If they miss the last bus, Brooks and Callista won't make it in time for the demolition tomorrow. They probably didn't bother packing, thinking they could persuade me. As I hesitated whether to tell them about the last bus, Callista suddenly started talking in a sulky tone, saying something unbelievable. But this divorce was initiated by the oldie, right? Dad, you should get alimony. It seemed Callista had given up and become defiant, realizing everything was exposed. Dad and Mom looked shocked. That's impossible. What you two did is a serious crime. Callista faltered for a moment. Show me the proof, but retorted defiantly. I placed a notebook on the table. This is the diary I started writing since I got married. Callista glared at me with a mocking look. How can you have any evidence without a mobile phone or PC? You don't seem to know that a diary is valid evidence. It's not just videos, audio, or images that count. Callista looked stunned. That's right, the lawyer agreed. This diary is substantial evidence. Brooks and Callista, realizing their defeat, hung their heads. I exaggeratedly looked at my watch. The last bus has already left. You can't get back home tonight. Mom looked at Brooks and Callista coolly. Yes, no taxis around here, and I doubt there's a convenient hotel. Okay, we're done here. Please leave now. Brooks and Callista left the house as if being chased out. From the second-floor balcony, I could see them hurrying towards the bus stop, probably unable to believe the last bus left so early. Watching Brooks and Callista's retreating figures, I felt a release in my heart. Some loose ends remained, but it felt like an end to me. After missing the last bus, Brooks and Callista, unable to find a taxi, ended up walking for about an hour to a hotel. The next day, when they reached the house, demolition had already progressed, but they managed to salvage some clothing. I had actually temporarily stored the contents of the house, including furniture, appliances, and my belongings in a warehouse, but I didn't tell Brooks and Callista. Later, the lawyer reported that the divorce was finalized, including a claim for compensation due to the divorce trial. Brooks was reluctant to pay the compensation, but pressure was applied to his company to ensure payment. Based on the detective's report, Brooks was fired for embezzlement, and Callista, involved in police matters, was expelled from high school, not to mention her university plans. Brooks, having lost his job, could only afford a small old apartment far from the station. There, he and high school dropout Callista lived together. Callista blames everything on Brooks, who in turn frequently scolds her, leading to constant quarreling, as reported by the detective. After quitting the real estate part-time job, I was unsure about my next step. Then, Dad suggested I help with the family business, so I started working at a management company handling his resort properties. Life in a resort area is a change from city living, surrounded by nature, and it's refreshing change. I also started keeping a dog, so I don't feel lonely living alone. Right now, this dog is enough to be considered family. I'm content living a relaxed life with just me and my dog.